By the end of this lesson, you're going to be comfortable in the user interface of Dynamo to prepare you for the rest of these tutorials. By the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to navigate the menu from an introductory point of view. We'll elaborate on some of the sub-menus further as we get into them throughout this series, but you'll be comfortable enough to know where things are and where to look. You're also going to know the subtle menu differences if you're in an older version of Dynamo. So our course is in Revit 23, which is Dynamo 2.13. Older versions of Revit have different versions of Dynamo. So we're going to open a slightly older version for you to be able to see those subtle differences. Anytime we run into those as well throughout this series, I'll try to mention the difference that it might be in an older version of Dynamo, so you have that knowledge in case you ever need to answer those questions for users within your firms. That in mind, let's get right into the rest of this lesson. Alright, to get started with this lesson, we are just in the Revit sample project. We're in Revit 2023 once again. Dynamo is available on the Manage tab under the Visual Programming panel. Previous versions of Dynamo were under the Add-ins tab. That's back in Revit 2017. So if you're a version back then and you don't see it under the Manage tab, you'll have to look under the Add-ins tab. So something to keep in mind. In order to launch Dynamo, we can go ahead and click on the Dynamo icon in the Visual Programming panel. Another icon that you see, the Dynamo Player icon, that's another tool available to us along with Dynamo, and we'll get into that in a later lesson as well. So with Dynamo open, we are on a landing screen that's pretty familiar as most landing screens that we have in most software, especially from Autodesk. We have a Files menu that allows us to create new files, create a custom node, which we'll learn about in a later lesson as well, and open existing files. We also have a Recent Files section for as you start to work in Dynamo, you can open those really quickly. There is a backup location. Dynamo does back up automatically for you at a set interval, so if you ever lose work, it might have backed up. It is important to save pretty often, but you can always navigate to that if you do run into an issue. Dynamo is working in a live mode with Revit, so you're always making changes really quickly, so it is good to save pretty often. On the right side of this menu, we have forums, websites, help areas, and things like that. Whole lot of different areas for you to explore in here. If you're more of a self-guided person, you can definitely navigate through the primer, the video tutorials for the out-of-the-box Dynamo stuff, or anything like that. In order to navigate this workspace, we're going to click on New. Once we're in Dynamo, we do have a few different things in front of us now. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have our library. This library contains all of the nodes that generate code for Dynamo. So these all contain boxes and wires that we can start to build code with. We have categories in here as well. So dictionary, display, geometry, so on. We are in Revit, so we do have a Revit category, which lets us control all the various Revit interactions that we can do within Dynamo. Down at the bottom, we have an add-ons category. So if you're in Revit, especially 2023, you have generative design with it. That does a whole lot of automation things with Revit, with Dynamo graphs. And you have a Revit category, which has still connections nodes. So if you're a structural engineer or structural BIM technician, these nodes are really handy for things like that. You can use these still connections nodes to start to automate a lot of that stuff. Really cool. Those come with Dynamo, so explore those as you can as well. On the center portion of our screen, we have the Dynamo workspace. The workspace has two parts to it. It has the node canvas, so if I start placing some nodes, and you don't have to do this if you're following along, if I start to place some number nodes, this is considered the node portion of my canvas, or the graph view. That's what this is considered. In addition to this graph view, we have a background 3D preview view. This one contains geometry. So Dynamo has a full geometry kernel to it that lets us build geometry right in Dynamo. You can also extract geometry from Revit and preview it in the background preview window of Dynamo. Something else to keep in mind. That is toggled in this upper right hand corner of the screen, and we'll jump back and forth as we go through the lessons as well. So two workspaces. If you'd rather not see the background 3D preview, that is available under the View tab at the top of the window and the background 3D preview flyout, and you can actually go through and turn that off. In addition to the Dynamo background preview, we also have a Revit background preview. So as we make things in Dynamo, we can actually preview those in the Revit viewport as well. We'll have an example on that later, and it's really cool because you can preview changes before you make them. All right, since we've already jumped up to these tabbed views, let's go ahead and navigate through those a bit. The first menu we have is the Dynamo window. We have an About tab that tells you which version you have. As mentioned, we have Dynamo 2.13 because we're in the latest version. We also have an agreement in here. It's kind of a standard thing with Autodesk products. You can read through that. We have preferences, and we have the ability to exit Dynamo. In the preferences menu, this contains all sorts of different preferences that carry through Dynamo graphs. So if you close Dynamo and reopen it, these preferences stay true between those versions. We have our default run settings. So generally speaking, Dynamo will try to run in a manual mode, which means it doesn't update automatically. We prefer to update automatically and then choose when to run manual. It's a preference thing. I'll tell you which version we're running in as we're running in those versions for examples. There is a preview in here. We can take a look at that when we build some graphs, but it shows you which nodes would start to build out and some of the other settings in here as well, which we won't get into right now. We also have various features. They include experimental features in Dynamo that aren't quite ready to be in Dynamo fully. One of them is T-splines, which are geometry nodes. Those are really great nodes for if you're dealing with complex geometry. Visual settings, I never touch these, just to be completely honest, but you can modify them as you please. And the one that I do mess with the most is the package manager. We have a whole lesson that's on packages and how to use them. But if we're navigating to the package manager in this version of Dynamo and up, it is in this preferences menu. So that's where we could start to modify these a bit. And as you can see, the installed packages already are generative design that comes with Revit. If you're in an older version of Dynamo, so it's 2.10 or older, we'll open that right now. In this case, I'm going to open what's called Sandbox. And Sandbox is an environment that isn't connected to a platform like Revit that you can preview functionality. So I'll open that right now. And as you can see, Dynamo doesn't have a Dynamo menu on it at all. It starts with File. The Packages menu is its own menu in older versions of Dynamo. So if you find yourself in an older version of Dynamo trying to find something with packages, it's its own menu, and vice versa. So something to keep in mind. I'm going to minimize that. And that's it for the Preferences menu. The next menu is the File menu. This lets you create new home workspaces, which is what we're in right now, a home workspace, a new custom node, or your various open and close operations. You can do save as, and so on. In addition to saving, Dynamo allows you to export the node view with the boxes as an image, or your background 3D preview as an image. This is really great because older versions of Dynamo, like back in Revit 2018, didn't let you export both of those separate. So it's really cool that they have that. You're also able to export your model to an STL. So STL is a file format for 3D printing. So if you start to model things in Dynamo and you want to 3D print them, you can do that. I've actually done that as well, and I've 3D printed various kind of crazy things. One of them was Christmas ornaments for a silent auction for a firm I worked at. So it was really cool because it was made in Dynamo with programming. The next menu is our Edit menu. This contains typical functions that you expect in any application: undo, redo, copy and paste, and all those have keyboard shortcuts assigned to them. So those are next to the command. So if I were to hit Control Z, I can start to undo what I created in the workspace right now. In addition to this, and we'll cover this in the Annotating Our Dynamo Graphs lesson, we're able to create notes, groups, and things like that. We can also select all, pretty neat. Let's go ahead and copy this note a bit. You don't have to follow along on this part, of course, because we're just exploring the interface. But we are able to start to clean up some of these nodes as well. So we have alignment commands in here. So if I were to select nodes, and we cover this pretty thoroughly in the Annotating Your Graph section, we can start to clean those up. Or you can just tell the whole node workspace to clean up on its own. And that is Clean Up Node Layout with Control L. Really great feature. I think it doesn't get used enough because it's kind of hidden. But if you know the keyboard shortcut Control L, you can just clean up your graph on the fly. Pretty cool. We already navigated a little bit of this view menu, but we have zoom commands in here. A lot of times I'll just use the mouse wheel though, that's faster. But if you really want to, you can use the keyboard shortcut or click these buttons. Your pan commands are in here as well. Panning in Dynamo is with that middle mouse button as well. Holding it down will allow you to pan, and rolling it allows you to zoom. And the background preview, it's similar, and we'll explore that function a little bit later. If you're somebody who's working in Dynamo and you want to see what it's doing in the background, you can actually show what's called the console, and I can drag this up and we can see how it's starting to work. This is really cool because as you're debugging and trying to figure out if something's wrong, this will start to add those error messages for you. And package developers can actually start to add notes to that if something went wrong. So that's a really cool thing to know about. You can also just navigate down and drag it up, or in the view menu, expand it. So when you're building Dynamo graphs, so what I'll do is I'll just add a plus node real quick. When you are building Dynamo nodes, you have various connectors to connect the nodes together to make code. You can change those connectors to just not show at all. There are other interactions for that, which we show later, but you can just hide them globally. I've never used that feature, but it is available to you as well. In older versions of Dynamo, you are also able to, and we'll make a real quick graph, you are also able to change your connectors and how they look. That's been removed recently, and I don't really know why, but it is something that is available in older versions, where you can make the connectors a little more boxy. So if you like that look and you're in an older version of Dynamo, you can use it. Newer versions, it's not there right now. So just to make you aware that it does exist if you see a graph that looks a little different. Background 3D previews we covered. We are able to navigate it. We're able to turn off that grid if you'd like to just hide it. And then you can also navigate and hide your Revit preview. This packages menu allows you to search for packages as well. So we still have a packages menu, but to actually manage them is in the preferences tab. Something to keep in mind. So we do cover packages in a later lesson, and we'll use this menu a whole lot. Generative design, we won't cover that in this series, but I will have another series covering generative design. In the resources for this series, I will include some links to generative design workflows that you can check out. There's a site called generativeprimer.com, which has really great information regarding generative design. The first thing you need to learn though is how to build Dynamo graphs, because generative design, that's the fuel that drives them. So keep that in mind. Under our help menu, these are all the same help options available on the home screen, so we won't go through each one, but they're there for you. And we also have a few things that we'll look at as well as we're building graphs. So we have things like properties of this graph where we describe it for users. We add other notes that people can use and things like that. We won't do that right now, but in other lessons when we build Dynamo graphs, we'll add all of these properties to it just to get those habits instilled into our minds for Dynamo graph creation. Additionally, we also have some icons in the workspace. So on the upper left corner, we have new, open, save, undo, and redo. This is our current Dynamo graph. It's not saved right now. That's why it has a yellow dot. And we also have the ability to export the nodes or the background preview as an image. Really quick way to do that. As you may remember, that's also available in the file export menu. So some of these things are in multiple places, which is pretty cool. We also have the ability to zoom to fit in these icons or zoom in and out with plus signs. You can also switch to a pan mode as well. In addition to that, we have our run mode in the bottom left corner of the screen. Right now we're in run automatic, so as I make changes, things in Dynamo update on the fly. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're ever wondering why something's not updating, it might be because you're in automatic or in manual run mode and you want to be in automatic. The other thing to keep in mind in Revit is if you're in a command, so if I do wall command, and I'm in a wall command now, Dynamo still will let you try to do things. So if I change one of these numbers, Dynamo won't update and it will actually say run started, even though I'm in automatic run mode. That's because I have a command open in Revit, so it's kind of halting it. So your UI is something you need to keep in mind and pay attention to when you're doing things in Dynamo, especially for Revit. So this run started is it starts to freak you out because you're wondering why nothing's changing. But if I were to go back into Revit and hit escape to finish the command, Dynamo then completes its run and we're good to go. So if you're ever stuck like that, go back into Revit and hit escape a few times and see if anything needs to change or be updated. So yeah, with that in mind, that's the general overview of the interface. You have a comfort level to where if I say we need to go to the View tab in Dynamo, you can go to that and so on. So with that, we will really get into the interface as we build graphs. And with that, lesson's complete.